Hi, and welcome to this recording about using and configuring distributed tracing with Kong. So let's jump straight into it. How can you configure distributed tracing with Kong? So Kong has this Open Telemetry plugin that allows you to configure and send traces to any Open Telemetry compatible backend. You can actually use this plugin to not only send metrics, logs, and traces, but today I'm just going to be having a look at defining or consuming those traces. So we'll be using this plugin. The next thing to look at is the configuration of Kong itself. So there are two parameters, and just having a look at the configuration page of Kong. There have been some deprecation of two of the fields, but they clearly mark the deprecation. So here's the one and here's the other here. So the two in question is the tracing instrumentations field and then the tracing sampling rate field. The instrumentations field is by default turned off. So if this field is not set, then nothing will happen, nothing will be instrumented. But it gives you the ability to actually set it at a number of different levels. For this example, we're going to set it to all so that you get everything through in your traces. The sampling rate by default is set to 0.01. This is because you don't necessarily want to trace every single request. It does add a little bit of latency to your request. So best practice would be to set this at a much lower level. For our use case, just for this example tutorial, we'll be setting that to 1 so that we can see all of the traces coming through. One thing to note as well, this is a global sampling rate configuration within the plugin. If I go to the configuration of the plugin, they have a field here called sampling rate as well, which allows you to set the sampling rate for this instance of the particular plugin. And you can see it says here, this value supersedes the overall sampling rate. So you can set this plugin at a service or at a root level and change the sampling rate. So this allows you to set a global sampling rate and then supersede it at a particular root or service level. So you've got the control on effectively how you want to configure that for the sampling of your services. So let's jump into the demo. What am I going to do? Well, I've effectively got a project here which I will share in a repository, and all I'm really doing is I'm installing a local kind cluster. So it's a Kubernetes local cluster. I am creating a Kong namespace and a secret with some certificates, which we will talk about in a second. I'm installing Kong using their Helm chart. I'm then installing the Prometheus operator chart, and this gives us Prometheus as well as Grafana. And then I've gone and chosen Grafana's distributed tracing backend called Tempo. So just doing a standard install of a monolithic Tempo instance. So that's what we're going to do. But first things, we have to provision and set up our Konnect account. So if you log into Konnect, you'll come to your gateway manager, which should look like this if it's a new account. So I'm going to create a new control plane. So it's going to be a self-managed hybrid control plane, and I'm going to call it OTEL. Next, this allows you to then create a data plane node. So this is where we're going to create our proxy, and that's what we have running on our local cluster. So it's going to be a self-managed, the latest version, which is 3.8. I'm going to change this down to Kubernetes. And what's really great about this is it allows us to generate our certificates. Now, these certificates get stored in Konnect, and we then use these as a mechanism to secure the connection between our proxy, our data plane, and this control plane. So I'm just going to copy the cluster certificate and come into here and paste it. And then I'm going to copy the key, and I'm going to come in here and create it. Now, recommendation for doing this really in the likes of production, you would probably be generating those certificates yourself using something like Cert Manager on Kubernetes. And then, you can effectively upload those using the Terraform provider that Kong give you. Next, I'm going to go down to the override value for the data plane. And why this is important is it gives me my endpoints that are specific to this control plane that I've just generated. So that's very important. But you can basically take this, copy and paste the whole thing, and that's going to give us our data plane. So going to the Kong values file that I've got here. Now, one thing to note is I'm going to add 2 additional environment variables. So these are the 2 that I showed you in the configuration page. I'm going to instrument everything and set a sampling rate of 1. So I'm going to move those across to Kong and add them to my environment variables section. And that gives us the configuration of our data plane plus the configuration for the tracing that we're going to use with our Open Telemetry plugin. So now that I've got all of that done, I'm going to run this install script. So just come into my bash. I'm going to install everything that I've said. So you can see here it's starting to create a kind cluster. So this will bring a single node up. On this additional pane, I'm just going to bring up K9. So as things are starting to be installed, we should be able to see how that all looks. Okay, that's up. So going to K9, this connects to my local kind cluster, and you can see here the context is kind. And then on the left-hand side, what it's doing is installing Kong, and you can see here I've now got a Kong namespace. Kong is starting to come up. Also, my monitoring namespace is starting to install the Prometheus operator as well. So we'll just give that a few seconds, and that will start installing. I'm going to just quickly switch to the Kong namespace and just show you, if I have a look at a secret, you can see here there are those 2 certificates that we generated into Konnect. And just to show you that that's being created. If I go back to Konnect now and have a look, you'll see now it has told me that my data plane node has been found. So that means the connection between my control plane and data plane is working. So clicking done and then going to the data planes, you can now see connected in sync. So my data plane is now connected to this Konnect control plane. So that communication is set up and ready to go. Going back to my cluster, let's actually switch to our monitoring namespace and just make sure that everything is set up. And as you can see, we have now got the Prometheus operator installed as well as Tempo. Tempo down at the bottom here, we've got Prometheus, we've got Node Exporter, Cube State Metrics to get all those metrics of our cluster, the operator itself, Grafana, and the Alert Manager. So what we're going to use today, we are going to be using Grafana and obviously the Kong proxy as well. So let's port forward the Grafana instance, always port forward on port 3000. So I'm going to forward that. Now, when I open up localhost 3000 in my browser, I get a login for Grafana. But what credentials do I need here? Well, to log in to Grafana, you come back to the same namespace, go to a secret, find the Prometheus Grafana secret, and we look at that, and it gives us the admin user and the admin password to log into Grafana. So taking that, I'm going to log into Grafana, and that takes me straight into the dashboard. I'm going to come here and I'm going to go to data sources. I'm going to add a new data source, and I'm going to add Tempo. Give it just a standard name, and the connection string is the name of the service, Tempo, the namespace, service.cluster.local at port 3100. So I'm just going to save and test that. And we got a successfully connected. So now going back to the home page, I'm going to go to Explore, where we can explore our metrics and look at Tempo. do a quick search, and obviously nothing comes back, which is as expected. You know, we haven't connected anything up to it, but you can see now we have got our Open Telemetry compatible backend. So now that everything's running, let's go and switch to the Kong namespace. I'm going to just port forward on port 8000, which is the standard port for Kong, and I'm going to use HTTP, and I'm going to just call that, and you'll get the standard response from Kong. No root. You can see it's come through Kong 3, and it's got a couple of the Kong headers as well. So everything is great. Everything is configured and set up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push some configuration. So I've got some configuration, some Kong declarative config that I'm going to push into Kong. So to do that, I'm going to come back to Konnect, and I'm going to go to organization. In organization, I'm going to go to system accounts. So I'll just start with a new one. I'm going to create a new account called demo. Team membership, I'm just going to give it a control plane admin, but you can obviously do sort of RBAC given least permissions, following the least permissions principle here. I'm going to manage a token and just generate a new token and just call it demo, have that going for 30 days, and then I'm going to copy that token so that I've got the token. Okay, so now I'm going to come, I've actually written a script called upload connect, and basically this takes the control plane name and a token, and it just does, go into the connect address, the EU region, the control plane name, the token, and it's going to push in my connect YAML. So I've got a connect YAML here. I'm going to push the YAML in, the declarative config. Then let's have a look at what that all looks like from the Kong side. Be much easier to talk it through visually. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to run my script. The first input is my configuration, my control plane name, and then the token, and that should run. And as you can see, 9 entities are created. I have some plugins, routes, consumers, and the like. So let's go across to Konnect and have a look what that looks like. Going to my OTEL control plane. I'm now going to go into my service. I've got a service HTTP bin, just pointing to httpbin.org. I've got a route that is a path of OTEL. So now we know how to query it. And then I've got a number of plugins. One of the main ones is the Open Telemetry plugin. So let's have a look at that guy. So what I've done here is created the Open Telemetry plugin, and I've set my tracing endpoint. So again, we're just looking at traces in this tutorial. Tracing endpoint is the service name, .monitoring.service.cluster.local at port 4318 v1 traces. This is the standard endpoint for Tempo for us to be able to push the traces across to Tempo, and all the other parameters I've just left as default. What other plugins do I have? I've just got a calls plugin, just adding a couple of plugins, and you'll see why I've done that in a second. A file log plugin, the Prometheus plugin as well, and I've got a basic auth plugin. I've just disabled it for the time being, but we'll enable that in a second and have a look at what that looks like. I've got one consumer. It's the OTEL consumer, which just has a username of OTEL and a password of OTEL as well. So let's go and make a call to that particular endpoint. So making a call to the OTEL endpoint, what we should get is a response back from HTTP bin, which is effectively just a mirror of the request that I've just sent. So now let's go and have a look at what that looks like in Grafana. So if I run a search, we now have a trace that's come straight in. So let's open that trace up and have a look. Well, this is really great. What I can see straight away is effectively everything going into this particular trace. You can see the router coming in, all of the different plugins. There's the cores, the Open Telemetry plugin, and again at different Nginx phases as well. Also at the header filter phase, this is at the access phase. And you can see the latencies of each of these as well, which is great to see. You can see the Open Telemetry plugin was 14 milliseconds, where likes of the Cause plugin was in microseconds. And then obviously looking at the balancer as well. So looking at the balancer, what we can see is if I open up the details, you can see that it's going to the HTTP bin. This is the internal load balancer of Kong. So we can see that that's going up to our upstream. So this gives us all of the information, total latency of 0.5 millisecond. But what's great about this is it gives us the ability to almost see at what layer, what level the latencies are currently being, where the latencies are happening, and the largest latency you can see here is the balancer, which is effectively the upstream. So that's where the largest amount of latency has been brought in for this particular request. So let's go ahead and let's enable that basic auth plugin. So just to show you as well. So I enabled a new plugin. I'm now going to make a call, and obviously it's going to fail. And it's going to fail with unauthorized because I've just enabled the basic auth plugin. So going back to Grafana and having a look, I'm going to just refresh this. I still have a trace. So let's go and have a look at that trace. And as you can see, what's happened here is that I've got the router, Kong's router, and then just a couple of the plugins in the access and header filter phases, but nothing else. I don't have that balancer. This shows you that the request hasn't gone to the upstream, but we obviously know what the response is. In this case, we got back a 401 unauthorized. So I'm now going to make the same request, but I'm going to log in. So I'm just going to give it the OTEL user and then the OTEL password. Let's try that again. OTEL password. Okay, what I'm going to do is just reset my password in my consumer. So coming here, I've got my basic credentials. I'm going to just reset the password to OTEL, save that, and then come back here and make that request again. There we go. So that just took a little bit of time to sync down with the change in the consumer. And you can see now the request has come through. So let's go back to Grafana, and it'll be the latest trace that came in. Go into that trace, and now you can see it's gone through the basic auth plugin and the balancer, so it has effectively gone to the upstream as well. So that's effectively the end of the tutorial. Hopefully that's given you a really nice introduction to distributed tracing within Kong, how easy it is to configure it and set it up, and then how you can start seeing those traces from the get-go. If you haven't configured this yet, I recommend getting this added into your Kong instances today. Hope that's helpful. See you next time. Goodbye.